if you're new to 95% Group, I just want to tell you a little bit about us. We are a company that is best in class literacy resources and professional learning. And these are the principles on which we rest our work. We believe that all children deserve a chance to learn to read. And I know every single one of you joining us tonight is right there with us on that. And our purpose as an organization is to unlock the power of literacy for every child. And we do that by supplying all educators with knowledge through professional learning and coaching, resources through curriculum resources, and wraparound support through implementation support and coaching that you need to transform developing readers. So it's our pleasure to be here with you tonight, and it's our pleasure to support you. The text that we are going to be working from tonight is this text called Science of Reading 2.0. And what we have here is a QR code. You can go ahead and scan it, and that way you can have access to the electronic copy of the book. And I'll be referring to the book throughout tonight's webinar. The book is really about thinking through, what we mean by the Science of Reading 2.0, which is making sure that we're taking that knowledge base and translating it to practice. And part of that, when we think about practice, is implementing the practices of the science of reading. And we know that, most of you, if not all of you, are all in on the science of reading. You're all in with your hearts and minds. Perhaps you've gone through a lot of professional learning. And it's really important to look at protecting that investment of knowledge building, but also protecting that investment in resources. We have to make sure that the curriculum materials and the professional learning align with the evidence and the science. And that's what this is all about tonight. What are the criteria that you can use to ensure that your investment of time and resources will get you that return that you want, which is positive outcomes for all of your students. So there are really four kind of big ideas that Ken and I will be talking about tonight. And this is things to consider when looking for kind of your literacy solution. Kind of four things we're going to look at. We're going to look at evidence, optimizing learning time, ensuring that the skills you teach are coherent and cohesive across all tiers of instruction, and then looking at professional learning as a non-negotiable. So with that, I'm especially delighted to be welcoming a wonderful leader to our webinar tonight, Ken Kirby. He's going to share his insights and wisdom on this topic. And so I want to introduce Ken to all of you by reading his bio. A passionate educator, Ken began his career as a kindergarten teacher before serving as a building level Alabama Reading First coach. Many of us remember those Reading First years. Later, as regional literacy specialist with the Alabama Reading Initiative, he supported multiple districts in Northeast Alabama. In 2017, as a K-12 school improvement specialist for Marshall County Schools, he supported reading, math, science, and overall school improvement initiatives in 12 schools. That's a big job, Ken, just saying. He is recently supporting 60 K-3 schools across North Central Alabama as a regional literacy leadership specialist for 9 school districts, managing curriculum, assessment, science of reading implementation, student-centered coaching, and the impactful processes that impact MTSS. So he truly is a leader with a great deal of diverse experience, but also a depth of knowledge in all of these areas. So I got to know Ken. I know Ken was about 3 years ago, I think. I had the opportunity to hear you speak about your own district's journey into the science of reading. And one of the things that I remember really impressed me is that you took it upon yourself to really learn about the science as you led your district through that transformation. So welcome. And I want to bring you in right away. And I want to ask you your thoughts. Why do you think this is a timely topic for those of us tuning in tonight?
Well, first, Laura, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be with you and Barbara again. It's good to see y'all. I know y'all are doing great things out there in other parts of the country, and I am humbled to be able to just share some ideas and some experiences in these 4 areas that I've lived through, I guess, for the past 24 years. It's been kind of a journey, but timeliness of this is huge. I think when you looked at all the people that were in the chat, from various areas of the world, actually, not just in the United States, but everybody's in a different place with their science of reading implementation. Some people may be really just trying to build the foundation, embarking on it. Some people may be working on sustaining it and trying to really keep the momentum going with what's been built already. So thinking about these 4 areas, I love those 4 topics. I could I could really sit around and talk ad nauseum about all of those ideas, all of these
Yeah.
concepts, and just
Hmm.
excited to be able to share some insight on those ideas today.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you. So let's just dive right in. So when we think about those four areas, in your Science of Reading 2.0 booklet, if you have that available, this is kind of outlined for you on page 23, just a general overview of these four topic areas. So let's dig into the first one, which is about evidence. So when we think about evidence, I want you to think about two types of evidence. We want you to think about evidence alignment, that's aligned to the evidence, that body of research known as the science of reading. But we're also going to talk about efficacy evidence. So let's tackle the first one. The first one is in your Science of Reading 2.0 book on page 6. It's basically the science of reading. And I think we're probably all on the same page here, that it's this vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading. This is from the Reading League's Defining Guide. If you don't have it, you can download it on the Reading League website. What really is impressive to me to remember, to keep in mind, is that this research is 5 decades, over 5 decades old, thousands of studies, multiple languages, interdisciplinary areas. We really have a preponderance of evidence about reading and writing and how it develops, why instruction matters, what could possibly go wrong, what needs to happen if things go wrong to really improve student outcomes through prevention and intervention. So we know a lot. So that's the first type of evidence alignment, is alignment to this body of research known as the science of reading. And in our Science of Reading 2.0 booklet, what I've done is I've taken that research from the science of reading, but I've also kind of mashed it together with the science of learning and with Rosenshine's principles of instruction to come up with kind of a conglomerate, 10 principles of instruction or 10 principles of practice that represent that evidence alignment. So the evidence alignment, evidence to the science of reading, in practice, here's 10 principles to keep in mind. One, provide that direct and explicit instruction to focus our attention, our students' attention. Number two, follow that clear sequence, and we'll talk about that sequence of skills, and provide repeatable, replicable routines. Number three, student practice with teacher support and error correction. One of the most important principles in the science of learning is that we learn from error correction. Also, we learn from a scaffolded approach, I do, we do, you do. So we want to begin to ease up on that supported practice as we monitor our students and allow for independent practice. Our sixth principle of instruction is to use that data to inform our instruction. Number seven, that power of review. In the science of learning, that's one of the most powerful things we know, is that review really helps consolidate learning. Eight seems pretty self-apparent. We want to actively engage our students with lots of opportunities to respond. Nine, we want to make sure that we have those resources, again, that are evidence aligned and research proven. So those 10 principles of instruction, the 10th being remembering our goal, that with that evidence alignment, 95% or more of our students can learn to read. That's really our North Star. That's why our company is called 95% Group. So when we think about building our literacy ecosystem in our schools, we want to make sure that all our practices and resources are both evidence aligned to the science of reading and evidence-based, have efficacy studies that show the programs work with real kids, real teachers in real classrooms. Now, you will notice, and I think this is why we need to make this a really a criteria that we pay attention to. Not a lot of publishing companies actually engage in efficacy studies because, as Emily Hanford said in her APM reporting, that they're expensive, they're difficult to do, and most programs don't get studied like this. But here is a QR code where you can scan and learn more about 95% Group's efficacy studies, because we are committed to making sure that we're not just putting another program in the marketplace. There's plenty of programs out there. We want to put something in the marketplace that has proven results. So that's one criteria I would encourage you to think about as you choose curriculum materials. Think about evidence alignment to the science of reading, and think about efficacy evidence as well. So I want each of you to kind of think about that. Think about the importance of evidence and making sure that you can make this part of your process as you examine curriculum materials. And Ken, can you comment on that? As a educational leader, I think you know a lot about what I call checking the credentials of a company and about of a program. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Been through a few curriculum adoptions in my career. I think when it comes to trying to look at various curriculums and the evidence that hopefully they have, one thing that I would definitely encourage everybody to really be mindful of is to not feel like you have to do that, of course, all by yourself. You really need committees and you need individuals that bring different perspectives to the table, various stakeholders, in order to be able to analyze and then digging into the right information. We know we've seen things, through ed reports, for example, that might be labeled as green, right? But we have to peel back some layers and look underneath that to see just what type of quality aspects, both instructionally, the foundational skills that are incorporated, the strategies that are incorporated into curriculum, and how tightly those align to science of reading principles. Of course, studies and journals, we can always dig into those and look at things from professional organizations that have maybe labeled curriculums as strong, moderate, or promising. And we know that we can definitely do that, but we can't just trust it blindly, I guess is my point. You've got to you've got to do some legwork, and you've got to kind of dig into it and consider, for example, how closely does that curriculum align with your state standards? How
Hmm.
much work is going to have to be done if it doesn't align very closely. So you want to consider that. We've heard, I know you have, and Barbara as well has heard Kareem Weaver speak multiple times about curriculums and their usability and their complexity. And we need to be mindful of whatever curriculum that we have as an option. How teacher friendly is it? How much additional work does it require for teachers to be able to invest in order for that curriculum to work for the students that they serve? So you got to take all those things into account. So evidence matters, absolutely. And
Yeah.
then there's also the things that come along with that in terms of the curriculum and how it fits with your school, your students, your district, your state, et cetera. You've got to take those into account.
Yeah, and I think really what you're advising us to do here is to be discerning consumers, right? Any publisher can put science of reading on the box of materials, but I think you really have to take that knowledge that you're building, as a practitioner and, be discerning and look closely to see, for example, those principles that I just shared with you, are they enacted in the lessons?
Yeah.
And who are the authors and what's the body of research on which the materials are based? All those things help us to not just, kind of fall for marketing, but really be discerning.
One more
Yeah.
thing on that too, Laura. Like, I think it's also something that doesn't get enough conversation is thinking about your current curriculum. And if you are looking for something new, think about how different the new curriculum option might be. So how big of a lift that curriculum is going to be. For instance, you may be using something that's very basal oriented now. And so when you start to look at other various curriculums, if something is much more abstract than what you're using now, it could be a heavier lift. So you got to consider that and know whether or
Hmm.
not you've got the strategies and the staff and the plan, the game plan, in order to be able to get that curriculum up off the ground well, if it is going to be something that is, what am I trying to say? It's something that is very much out of the norm from what teachers have been currently using. So you
Yeah.
got to just take
Hmm.
that into account. It's nothing to be afraid of, nothing to be scared of course, but you just have to consider those things too.
For sure. And I think that all the teachers that are tuning in tonight, we're happy to hear you say, this has to be something teachers can use, and we have to have professional learning to wrap around it to support its use. So
That's right.
great. So thank you for that. So evidence matters, making sure that our program and our instruction really are following those evidence aligned principles, but also have efficacy studies because your investment is this is probably one of the biggest investments you're going to make in your school and making sure that we have that evidence alignment first and foremost. The second thing that I think is really critical is to think about, we don't have time to waste. We have to maximize every minute of instruction. So, what are some things to remember and what are some things to look for in any sort of resources that will help you optimize learning time. So for that, I'm going to go back to the science of learning and just share some kind of learning science principles that come directly from this body of research called the learning science. I adapted this from the science of learning, Deans for Impact. Some of you might know the Deans for Impact organization. You can actually dig deeply into this on their website. So I've referenced it here for you. So evidence-aligned instruction from the learning science, number one, I already mentioned this before, we learn from something that we already know. So we make sure when you're looking at lessons, do the lessons connect the known to the new? Is their review built right in? Second principle is about learning load. Many of you have probably been studying about cognitive load. And, we know that students' learning is simply impeded if they're given too much information at once. So lessons need to be sequential. They need to be designed with that gradual release model. I do, we do, you do. And those routines need to be repeatable and replicable because we don't want students' cognitive bandwidth taken up by just trying to figure out what's the routine. So we want repeatable, replicable routines that kids know what to do and they can hit the ground running. Principle number 3 is all about meaning. So we need to make sure that the lessons that we enact have clearly defined focus, clearly defined purpose, and that those skills that we're learning are always applied in reading and writing. So they don't sit alone. They're always applied to what they're designed to serve. Principle 4 is about practice. Practice is essential to learning, but not all practice is the same. So we need to think about lessons and look for these in your lessons. Do they include guided practice, scaffolded with a teacher, independent practice, and interleaved practice, which simply means mixing up practice with different concepts rather than focusing solely on one single concept. And that's really, it goes back a lot to this idea of review as well, because kids are always then having to kind of reintegrate previous learning with new learning. Another principle is feedback. We know feedback is essential for new knowledge and skills. So we want to make sure that we're providing that feedback, targeted feedback. And finally, that safe and valued environment. It's really important that classrooms are deliberately designed for safety, respect, and success. And I want to say something about success. I was just listening to a webinar recently about the science of learning. And the question was, do kids have to be motivated to learn, or is learning motivating? And the answer is more the latter than the former. In other words, incremental steps of success that we build in for our students really is the motivating factor as a learner when you can be successful as a learner. Okay, so when we think about then, how does that translate to kind of some big ideas around optimizing learning time? Number one, look for lessons that have that gradual release. I do, we do, you do, and begin with a review of previous learning. Number 2, instruction is focused. Students are clear on the purpose for learning. There's lots of opportunities to respond in the lesson, and skill instruction is always followed by application in reading and writing. Number 3, another way to optimize your learning time is to make sure that those routines allow our students to focus less on the process to actually learning the content. A fourth principle to look for is making sure that we have opportunities for practice built in. And finally, language needs to be clear, unambiguous instructional dialogue that has consistent academic language. I was just, again, I've been digging deeply into the science of learning and how critical direct instruction is for the science of learning. And for us as teachers to have precise, unambiguous instructional dialogue that can initially be scripted for us in lessons until we become comfortable with the language. That type of clarity in instructional dialogue is just helpful for us as teachers because it helps us make that consistent language both across grades and across tiers of instruction. So of all of those things I just shared, what are some key principles to remember when you're optimizing learning time? So Ken, would you like to kind of comment on that while our participants think through that?
But yeah, a couple of things kind of come to mind, and I love that last slide that you had that just had those ideas about routines and management. And somebody said to me one time, they said, efficiency. And that kind of always stuck with me that I think the more explicit we can be in how we teach, how we set students up to learn, I think that's going to definitely increase how efficient, we move in and out of different components of our lesson across the school day.
Mhm.
Thinking at it from the standpoint of those routines that we want to set up, take the time up front, pay it forward, in order to be able to coach students up on how to handle certain structures in your classroom and expectations. Definitely do not shy away from giving feedback, positive feedback, and
Mhm.
corrective feedback along the way. Matters immensely, especially early on. So you really, we know great teachers set the tone early. They understand that if they can do the hard work in the first few weeks of school and gradually get things up off the ground, then they're going to have a much more efficient approach to how their instruction unfolds over the course of the school year. We know that. From a leader's standpoint, I think of this because that's the majority of what I do now, Laura, is I support principals and district level contacts with thinking through effective implementation. Thinking about leaders, definitely letting data drive how you structure reading blocks. I
Mhm.
think trying to move away from the norm of a one size fits all. I've had conversations with principals recently about this, that let your data drive what grade level might need additional time, right? If I have a large number of students who are struggling, readers that are moving up into a grade level next year, then maybe I could find some additional minutes for their tier one core instructional
Mhm.
time. Maybe I can find additional minutes for their tier two intervention time. Maybe I could find additional minutes for both of those time blocks during the
Mhm.
school day. So thinking about that, which of course helps in optimizing learning time. And then the last thing that I'll mention is, of course, transitions. We think we see more and more schools going towards walk to intervention models in their school. And so thinking really carefully about how we set that up, how we monitor that, how we give feedback early on to make sure that that's going to move very fluidly and very smoothly in our schools is important. Transition with that is huge. Even if it's not a walked intervention model, but maybe it's a pull-out intervention model.
Mhm.
What's the proximity of my interventionist locations? What's the proximity that they're going to have to take and move students from one classroom to another
Yes.
spot? So I got
Yes.
to take those
Mhm.
things into account as a leader.
I'm glad you mentioned walk to intervention. And also, you mentioned, tier one is not a one size fits all. So many schools are going to a walk to read model, which is where during that tier one instruction, students are walking to, whatever it is that they need based on the data, for their core instruction, in addition to intervention. So I think those are models worth exploring because they're A, based on data, B, efficient because they're designed to really pinpoint what students need at any one point in time. And C, I think it really maximizes our staff when we think about a walk to model. Mhm.
Correct. And I think that'll connect with, I believe, your last topic in the
Mhm.
webinar, which is
Right.
about really improving the professional learning.
That's right. That's exactly right. So this is timely because we're talking about, walk to intervention and walk to read. So it's really it's about tiers of instruction. So let's kind of level set on this. So one of the things that is really a good way to make sure that we're optimizing time, but we're also optimizing instructional impact, is to ensure that the skills that we are teaching, whatever grades we are in, the skills that we are teaching are coherent and cohesive across all tiers of instruction. So when we think about the tiers, this is just a simple graphic of the tiers. I'm sure all of you know what we're talking about, but just level set on this. Tier one is that core grade level instruction, which can be delivered in whole group with small group differentiation, or it can be delivered in a walk to read model, a small group model. Tier two is delivered to a subset of that tier one group, which is designed to then provide those students with additive instruction, not replacement instruction. But we want them to have more time, smaller groups, and more targeted instruction based on data. And then tier three, of course, is a subset of that group of students, getting that tier three instruction because it's delivered in very intense instructional modalities and instructional time. So all of these tiers of instruction are really driven by the instructional cycle. And I love this. I use this all the time. This is from Deb Glazer and Jan Hasbrook's wonderful book on fluency, but it's just a really terrific representation of the instructional cycle that we all think about when we think about tiers of instruction. So obviously we want to have that high quality tier one instruction for everybody. Again, doesn't when we say everybody, we don't mean one size fits all. It can be delivered in a combination of whole group, small group, or perhaps even all in small groups. From there, we want to identify our students who are at risk. And this would be for the case of what we're talking about today, we're talking about students who are below benchmark. And then for those students, we want to determine what do they need? Tiers two and three, what intensity of instruction do they need? We want to implement those individualized plans and monitor the progress and then make changes or continue the plan. But this is all driven by data, right? Tier one instruction, we screen all of our students. We determine from that screener the students who are at risk, but we don't stop there. We have to have a good diagnostic because you cannot determine instructional needs in tiers two and three without a diagnostic. That really pinpoints and targets instruction. And then, of course, we want to progress monitor frequently because we want to keep kids out of what I call the cul-de-sac of intervention, where they just kind of keep spinning, spinning, spinning. We want those incremental steps of success so that they can continue to move, accelerate forward. And we know that by frequent progress monitoring. This is an example. This is just our 95% group phonics word study continuum. So when we talk about kind of those, finely tuned skills across the grades, and the skills are also coherent across tiers, right? And one thing I do want to point out, we look at our phonics word study continuum as going all the way up through fifth grade. The foundational skills do not end, in second or third grade. They really go on up into grades 4 and 5. So when we think about, having aligned skills across grades and across tiers, we also want to align the academic language, across grades and across tiers. We want to make sure that scope and sequence is the same, but the amount of instruction or the intensity of instruction differs so that our kids are getting additive, not replacement instruction in tiers two and three. And of course, data is really what, connects our tiers of instruction, pinpoint our students' needs, informs our grouping, ties us to instruction, and provides visibility, roll-up visibility to all our invested parties. So when we think about this is a really, really important criteria when you're looking at resources, when you're looking at an ecosystem of resources across tiers, you really want to look for that alignment and that consistency and that coherence so that essentially you're maximizing that instructional time. And all of this is really determined through a database decision-making model. If any of you get perspectives on language and literacy from IDA, this was an article that Stephanie Stoller and I published fall of 2024. And it was really about, in a collaborative problem-solving model, what do? We assess. What do we do next? We analyze. What do we do next? We instruct. But it isn't linear, it's cyclical, right? So after we instruct, we assess, we analyze, we instruct more, we assess, we analyze. So this graphic is just designed to, show that this is a cycle that we really want to engage in. Now, what this means to me then, when I'm looking at choosing curricular resources, I want to make sure that the assessments align with the resources and that the resources are coherent and aligned across tiers, right? So really important to think about it as a whole ecosystem, not this disparate assessments, disparate tier one, disparate tier two, disparate tier three. It really has to be a cohesive and coherent ecosystem. And that coherence across tiers could not be more important. So go ahead and read this to yourself because this is from Sharon Vaughn and Jack Fletcher. It's all about coherence. And I'm wondering for our participants tonight, if this resonates with any of you, if any of you in your own experience where, in tier one, we're doing something very different from an intervention. And so kids are trying to push together all these different approaches. So we really want to make sure that we are the ones making sure those approaches are aligned. So I think, really addressing this one's really important. And I think really addressing this requires courage, because I think, you have to look at this and go, first of all, If I'm choosing resources, I have to hold those high standards for efficacy and evidence. But then I also might have to do what I call pull weeds and plant flowers. Because many times when we do an audit of all the materials we're using in our schools or all the materials we're using in our districts, if we have to make room for something different, something better, we have to pull some weeds to make room for that, right? Because it's not an additive process. It's designed to streamline and make efficient and coherent a literacy ecosystem across grades and across tiers. Because that consistency compounds. So when I think about this courage that it takes, sometimes the most courageous thing to do is de-implement, because sometimes we have to pull those weeds to plant flowers. So I want all of us listening tonight to think about that. Maybe this resonates with you. Maybe you've had to, in your own practice, give up some things in order to make room for others. And that's going to be a tricky thing. So, Ken, as an educational leader, how have you been able to kind of work through de-implementation in your own experience?
That is definitely, I will say, one of the most difficult aspects of implementation. Regardless, reading, math, you pick it. It's definitely a challenge. We get comfortable, I think, as educators, we get comfortable with things that we've used. What I try to do, and you mentioned about just audits of resources. I'm a fan of implementation resource audits, or doing like an inventory in order to try to figure out, what is it that has truly worked, right? Of course, from district leadership and school leadership, you have to take into account cost, right? We always have that kind of that's underlying and it's under the surface, so to speak. But what resources have made a difference truly, that have moved the needle for student data? And so if we can have something that can really back up those other supplemental resources, then it gives us some ground to stand on whether or not we want to actually keep those versus pulling those, and treating them as weeds that we need to move on from. I think too, when you think about high level practices, high level instructional practices, and then also high quality resources, I think coaching, we value, and I know there's somebody in the chat had spoken, I believe, and said they were a reading specialist. And I think I saw one of my colleagues I used to work with, Lisa Ledford, that might be in the group tonight too. So shout out to Lisa. Miss you, Lisa. You're an awesome reading specialist. But I know that when it comes to those practices and the way we utilize resources effectively, our reading coaches, our reading specialists can play such a pivotal piece to that puzzle. They can be those movers and shakers that really can get into the trenches and help teachers see how to plan, what is truly making a difference, so that we can make some determinations about what is not necessarily needed anymore. So coming at it from the coaching standpoint is huge. From a leadership standpoint, doing that inventory audit, I think, is important. Making sure that whatever we're using is backed up by increases in our data. And then also, what's something that you had on a previous slide, I think, Laura, that made me think about just collective commitments for the teachers that are in the session tonight. And I believe it may actually connect with Nicole's question. She talked about academic language, I think, in the chat.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so when we think about our curriculum, we think about our assessments, as you mentioned, Laura, and then we think about our standards. Really, in a perfect, would want those three components of what we utilize on a daily basis to have strong alignment. So I
Hmm.
need my curriculum to embrace the things in my standards. And if not, how can I embed that? I need my assessments to embrace the language that's in my curriculum. If
Hmm.
not, how can I embed that? And so I've got to always take those three pieces of the puzzle into account. So hopefully that helps Nicole a little bit when we start to think about the language that's
Hmm.
necessary. And I would just, definitely emphasize to her that if you feel like you're speaking a little bit above your students' heads, that's okay. That's
Yeah, I was just
okay.
going to say that, Ken. Yeah. It's
That's
okay.
okay. We would rather raise the level of our lexicon for our students rather than suppress that and water it down for them. So challenge them with the language that you use. That's what great teachers do. Last point I'll make is just thinking about PLCs. I know a lot of schools now, really come at learning and collaborative learning opportunities with PLCs. Let your PLCs be infused by these high quality
Yeah.
practices, the high quality resources, let those things be at the forefront of what your goals are for your PLC. Therefore, you get more comfortable with using the best resources that you have. And in turn, it ends up being something that can actually stick, and it can stay with a grade level or with a school for the long term. So.
That's right. That's right. Very good. Yeah. So, and this might be what you were referring to. And I did want to answer somebody else's question. They were asking about, in this graphic that we talk about tiers of instruction. Da, 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 da. Are we referring to students with IEPs as primarily tier three? And for the most part, yes. Although remember that as you're working with your students, they may have an IEP in one area, but not another. So you might have a student with an IEP who is receiving tier two level intervention in reading, perhaps. So it's not a super simple answer, but for the most part, we do think of our students with IEPs as tier three instruction. Okay, so let's go to the next one, which is professional learning, because we've already actually talked quite a bit about this tonight. So we'll just kind of wrap this up here and talking about how, professional learning is really not negotiable. And actually, Ken and I did recently a webinar on professional learning specifically, and we kind of opened with this. We know that according to the National Council on Teacher Quality, which you probably know, the National Council on Teacher Quality conducts data on teachers and instruction. And Heather Pesky, who's the president of that National Council on Teacher Quality, was quoted here in an Ed Week article. And she said, only about a quarter of us who leave our teacher prep programs enter classrooms to prepare to teach kids to read in a way that is aligned with the science and research on reading. And that's because NCTQ has done a lot of audits of different syllabi at teacher preparation programs. So, first of all, I mean, this kind of applies to me. I mean, I know I went through teacher prep a long time ago, but I really wasn't brought up understanding some of these concepts around the science and the research on reading. And it's not just those of us who are teaching kids to read the first time around, it's also for many of us in the middle grades. There was a research study that looked at teachers in the middle grades, and they found that about 44% of teachers in grades 3 through 8 report about 44% of their students frequently have difficulty reading that complex text at their grade level. And many of those teachers, if not most of those teachers, need support to know what to do with those students because they're teaching content rather than teaching reading. So we have a lot of us, both in our early grades and middle grades, that need support in learning and teaching our young readers. But here's one thing I want everybody to remember. I say this all the time. There's no shame, there's no blame, right? Whether we got this information in teacher prep or not, there's no shame, there's no blame. We have unfinished work to do, and professional learning can really help provide that bridge. So if you're leaders listening in tonight or teachers listening in tonight, think about how professional learning oftentimes is going to make up for perhaps what we didn't get in our teacher preparation program. So luckily, there is a lot of research around what works in professional learning. Linda Darling Hammond and her colleagues did a study on what makes PL effective. This was a good study. And basically, how do we improve student outcomes through teacher knowledge? One, as in our professional learning environments, we have focused content, active learning, we collaborate, we see clear models of effective practice. That's, it's not enough to just get our knowledge, right? To get our knowledge base in the science of reading. What does that look like in practice? Coaching is critical, and professional learning has to be sustained over time. It's not a one and done, process. So in another book that we're going to give you a link to, I created this kind of professional learning checklist because I really think we've got to think about, is our professional learning, again, it's just like our kids, how do we optimize our learning time? How do we make sure that when we're sitting at the table for professional learning, that we are building our base of understanding by following some of these key principles. So I'll just give you a minute to kind of peruse those key professional learning principles. And as you're reading through those, one or more may kind of stick out to you more than another. I know that one that sticks out for me always is provide professional learning in literacy for everybody because all of us are reading teachers. And the last one is what I mentioned when I told you about meeting Ken, making sure that if you're a leader, that you're learning alongside your teachers so that you really understand the science of reading and the science of learning. Another resource that I think is helpful for us when we think about professional learning is when we look at the Joyce and Showers research, which some of you might be very familiar with. And this just simply says in different professional development modes, which ones translate most fully to practice. And this is designed to be cumulative. So if you're just learning theory, okay, you're building your knowledge level a little bit, your skill level a little bit, but there's no transfer to practice. When you have the theory and a demonstration, notice the knowledge is getting a little more knowledge and more skills. When you have theory, demonstration, and practice, now you're starting to make that transfer to your own practice. But when you have coaching, when you have somebody side by side offering you support, that's when this all coalesces into knowledge, skill, and practice. This is a really powerful, powerful lesson for us to learn about professional learning. The other thing that it's important to know about professional learning is that there has been a link established between teacher knowledge and student outcomes. And all of these studies that you see listed here is that the best outcomes come from implementation supported by coaching. Again, coaching is really key. And it's important, I think, to remember, that teaching is a cognitively complex profession. And there's a lot of moving pieces. Ken talked earlier about how we're trying to pull together our standards and think about our kids and our teaching skills, our own teaching skill development. And so we are always in this position of continual inquiry and trying to expand our repertoire and kind of expand our knowledge and practice. I think that's one of the beauties of this profession. That's one of the reasons I've been really honored to be part of this noble profession. It's a profession of inquiry and curiosity. All right, so we know professional learning really matters. It really helps to pick up the gap that some of us may have had in our initial training, and it also helps to keep us contemporary in our contemporary understanding of research and practice. So, Ken, what have you found in your own experience? I know you've already alluded to some of these tonight, but just share again some key to impactful professional learning for teachers.
It is the lifeblood of sustaining any initiative you have. Is how we strengthen learning, how we know where to really focus our attention. One of the principals I was actually with this morning, she used the phrase, center our focus. How can we center our focus on what our data shows us is a need? So we can talk about student data. We know that. We know we have to be able to look and see where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are in order to know how to then target professional learning. You can think school-wide professional learning. We talk about school-wide initiatives. We also talk about grade level targets, grade level initiatives that can be specific to the needs for students in the grade level. But we also can't discount the data that we need to make sure that we have our eyes on and a finger on the pulse is what is the background of our teachers in our schools. So from a leadership standpoint, I've got to ensure that I know where my teacher strengths are in terms of what professional learning opportunities they've had in the past, and then also some things maybe that they have not yet been able to be engaged with, or maybe they've been deprived of. And I've got to make sure that I've got those things in mind when I start to set professional learning goals for the upcoming 25-26 school year. And right
That's
now is
right.
the perfect time. This is the perfect time to be thinking about this. I think too, when you think about the data, one of the things that kind of comes into the fold again, and you showed it on the Joyce and Showers research, is the coaching aspect. And so
Mhm.
we're fortunate in Alabama to have an elementary reading specialist in every school across the state, and they do amazing work each and every day. And so much of what they do is in-house professional learning. Anytime I'm
Mhm.
involved in a coaching cycle with a reading coach or reading specialist, that is professional learning. It's very targeted, it's very focused. You can get
Yes.
into, long-term, short-term cycles, but that makes a huge difference. And the fact that, the piece that you lifted up on the slide before that had to do with everybody's a reading teacher. So for
Hmm.
leaders that are in the chat today, or just for teachers, even if you're not a principal or an assistant principal or a district leader, then you can definitely have a voice and be an advocate for how you perceive needs for professional learning structures in your building. So
Yeah,
share your ideas with your administrators and talk to them about how you can really involve other areas within your school, special ed teachers, EL teachers, interventionists, counselors,
everybody,
media specialists,
everybody.
everybody.
Yes.
Some of the most impactful schools that we have here in North Alabama, and one of the common denominators is that they really have an all hands on deck mentality. They have
Hmm.
everybody that's pulling in the same direction for the benefit of students. And the last thing I'll leave with saying is just this idea of have a vision for infusion. Okay, I'll say it like
Hmm.
that. I said that at one of our meetings the other day, and people kind of looked at me funny. But what I mean by that is that if I'm a leader, or if I'm a grade level teacher leader, or if I'm just a leadership individual inside of a building, then what I want to think about is whatever that critical initiative is that I have, that's based on the data, that's based on what we need to improve upon in terms of the science of reading implementation. I want to make sure that that is something that infuses every lever, every system management strategy I have. So I'm talking
Yeah.
about, let it infuse your PLCs, let it infuse your walkthroughs, let it infuse your faculty meetings, let it infuse what you're sharing with the community through social media. Let that become something that you have all of the individuals in your school gravitate towards each and every day. And just get
Hmm.
tunnel vision and work the
Hmm.
plan, trust the process, and just go for it. Don't hesitate.
Yeah, I love that. I've heard you say that before, plan the work, work the plan. And I do think that, we do have to sometimes, force ourselves to have that tunnel vision and just keep laser focused on the most pressing need that we have, which is, I'm guessing you wouldn't be tuning in tonight, all of you, if you didn't think that most pressing need was ensuring all your kids can read. I wanted to capitalize on something you said, Ken, because Lisa stated it really well in the chat. She said it's been her experience that schools focus on instruction assessment, but they fall short about analyzing the data, right? You can assess all you want, but unless you dig into that data and really analyze it, it's not informative for you. So that's why that visual really includes not just assessing, but analyzing that data. It's critical. It's absolutely critical. I want to say something else about analyzing data too. Analyzing data not only helps us see what our kids need, but it also is a pulls behind the pulls the curtain on what's our teaching, how effective is our teaching, and how effective is our, for example, tier one. If we do a screening for all of our kids and the majority of the kids are below benchmark, we've got a tier one problem, right? So assessment and analyzing that data is critical, not just to know how to teach our kids, but also helps us understand where we need to focus instruction and instructional resources. Okay, very good. So the big takeaways then, let's take those four things that we talked about tonight and turn them into takeaways. Number one, when you're thinking about protecting your investment, make sure that the resources you choose are both evidence aligned and evidence based, right? Be a discerning consumer. Number two, focus on practices and resources that optimize learning time for students and optimize teaching time for teachers. Number three, ensure that skills are coherent and cohesive across all tiers of instruction. And number four, high quality professional learning is the best investment you're going to make. There is one more thing I wanted to mention as a takeaway, that really protecting your investment requires a commitment to long-term implementation and long-term sustainability. And that is really informed by this other science, this other body of science. We've talked about the science of reading, talked about the science of learning, but the other body of science we really have to look at is the implementation science, because the implementation science is really helping us understand what it is we need to do to bridge research to practice. And that's worthy of another time and another place, but I just wanted to make sure that we are, we're all united in this idea that any sort of, literacy change, literacy transformation takes time, effort, commitment over time. I think Barb put this in the chat. So the other book that you may want to look at if you're interested in this idea of implementation science. So this other book is called The Courage to Lead Literacy. And you can get it from the QR code or from the what Barb put in the chat, the link that Barb put in the chat. And it's really designed for leaders, but I think all of us as educators can glean information about the implementation science and the phases of implementation that really help us understand the process that we go through in protecting our investment, right, over time. And this book also, too, is really nice because it gives profiles of different school districts and different school leaders that have made that transformation over time and tells kind of their stories and lessons learned. So as we wrap it up, just think about, what resonated with you today, what questions still remain, and just all of you here joining us tonight, just think about, what is your next best step? How has this informed your practice? And what is it that you want to take away from tonight?
Well, I think it's just an overall approach to school improvement.
It really
I think,
is.
when you think about that, you put your eggs in a basket that data shows you need to be putting your eggs in that basket, and then you just
Yeah.
work the plan. And what is it we know, right, Laura, that the average life cycle of an initiative is around 3 years? And so
Hmm.
everybody that has already embarked on this initiative, your
Yeah,
challenge is to beat that average. Your challenge
agreed.
is to push and to support, and just remember that it's about principals supporting, it's about reading specialists supporting, it's about teachers supporting other teachers. It's about never being satisfied, always being just
Mhm.
relentless, and just wanting to improve. So that's everybody's challenge. And I would venture to say, I bet everyone that's in the webinar tonight has that mindset.
I'm sure they do. And that's what I really appreciate. I know that, many of you have put in a long day of teaching already or a long day in administration or whatever it is. And the fact that you joined us tonight is just really honoring to all of us here at 95% Group and to Ken. And so we thank you for that. I do want to share with you that we have some summer professional learning opportunities. First of all, you can access all of our on-demand sessions and resources. And we've got so many webinars and resources that you can access. And we're going to have, uh, starting Tuesday, May 27th, you'll be able to access top 10 tool information about top 10 tools, which is a comprehensive professional learning asynchronous course that we offer. This whole Science of Reading 2.0 series, it's been a 4-part series. This is the last of the 4 parts. You could access the whole series. You can access the webinar on the courage to lead, access the webinar on professional learning, trust the science of reading to improve intervention. We did a whole webinar on intervention. So we got lots of resources for your ongoing learning, and we invite you to check us out and learn more about what we offer. And again, just to thank you for all you do each day to be the best for the world. I got that from a speaker at Plain Talk this year. He said, we often talk about being the best in the world, but really what we're doing as educators is we're trying to be the best for the world. So thank you, all of you who joined us tonight. Thank you, Ken. It's always great to be with you. Time goes so fast. And thank you, Barbara, always for your ongoing support. Here's my contact information and Ken's contact information if anyone wants to reach out to us with lingering questions or additional ideas. If you want information about 95% Group products and services, these are all of our account associates and account executives. So we'll leave this up so you can see your state and feel free to reach out to our wonderful account associates and account executives should you want more information about us. So once again, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate you. We appreciate the opportunity to support you and have a wonderful evening.